Hello and welcome to Pride in London Live. I'm Reya El-Salahi, your host, joining you for the last show of the season, of the 2018 season that is. And I understand there's some sort of big football match going on, so thank you very much indeed for joining us despite that. I'm joined tonight by a really impressive lineup of panellists who'll be sharing with you their thoughts on a range of topics in just a moment's time. Let me introduce them to you first. First up, we've got Michael Segalov. He's the journalist, activist, and one of the people behind the London LGBTQ Centre. Welcome. Hey. We've also got Dawn Butler, the Labour MP for Brent Central and Shadow Secretary for Women and Equalities. Dawn, welcome.
Hi.
And also, last but by no means least, making up tonight's panel, Tim Sigsworth, MBE, Chief Executive of the LGBT Youth Homeless Charity, the Albert Kennedy Trust. Tim, welcome.
Thank you.
So tonight, throughout the show, you can get in touch and share your thoughts on anything you hear being discussed. Put your comments, your questions to the panellists and we'll share them. Just do that by commenting below. Now, in the 51 years since homosexuality was decriminalised in the UK, much has changed, but there's still a long way to go. What challenges do LGBT plus communities face, and is the right support in place? Tonight, we explore support in the community. And just a reminder, as I said, throughout the discussion, do get in touch by commenting below with your thoughts and questions to the panellists. Right, let's kick things off, Michael, with you. What support does the LGBT plus community need in 2018?
Where to start? I mean, I suppose the thing that I find most interesting when looking at this is that as the barriers and challenges that the community have faced have developed, certainly in the last kind of 40 or 50 years, so too have the resources and the support and the spaces they need to go alongside them. So when we had legislation which made it harder to be LGBTQ+ in this country, the struggle we had was clear. We knew what we were fighting against. We knew what it was we needed to do, and so the resources, the energy, the time went into that. And sure, the community had other problems too, but there was a focal point. And as that slowly dissipated, slowly we've managed to pass legislation that kind of creates an equal playing field in this country. I think it's become harder and harder to work out exactly what services are needed and what spaces are needed. But that's not to say the problems have gone away. I mean, they're just much more acute. You're not fighting against legislation or laws which make it harder for us to exist, but we're fighting against a society where there's microaggressions, where there's prejudice, which it kind of sits below the surface. So as far as I'm concerned, I think the key thing is to ensure there are services and spaces that are tailored to what the community needs. And which sadly is struggling to exist at the moment.
And on that point, actually, congratulations to you, because it's just a few weeks since you've had some success in that field. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I'm one of lots of people, a huge network of volunteers who are trying to set up an LGBTQ+ community centre in London. There are incredible organisations, and I'm sure we'll speak about some of them later, that exist in the UK and in London in particular, which provide support to our community. But I think all too often they're places that we rely on when we're in times of crisis, which is quite right, that's what we need. They're places we turn to when we're struggling, when we need some sexual health, to homelessness, to mental health. But actually something that exists outside of London, actually has been in London before until it closed down, is community spaces that are there which aren't to go to in times of crisis, but to come together, to socialise, to share about your history and experiences, a place where young people can go to and old people can go to and have kind of intergenerational contact. There's a whole list of reasons. And we're hoping to create a space in London which does that, which is a community hub and somewhere that people can turn to at all times really to find people like them.
Yeah, and you threw to Tim just briefly there, but Tim, a great example of the sort of support that's out there. Just tell us, in the year 2018, what kind of support do you think is needed?
Well, I think the thing to remember is, Michael was saying, is legislation has moved on, society not necessarily, and there are a lot of marginalised groups within the LGBTQ world. People who are rejected by their families, people who find that they're fighting multiple oppression because they're a member of not just one, but a few minority groups. And society isn't caught up with that. And if you look at mainstream services, if you look at housing, employment services, LGBTQ people are still discriminated against, and the protections the law offers isn't enough for them. So, for example, at the Albert Kennedy Trust, we know that 1 in 4 homeless young people identify as LGBT, and 77% of them have been rejected by their families just for being brave enough to come out. So things haven't moved on, haven't shifted. So we need to move to a model where it's everybody's business, where it's not just down to the community to deal with these problems.
Yeah, Dawn, nodding your head there.
Yeah.
A sentiment you agree with?
No, absolutely, I agree. it should be everybody's purpose in life to make the country where we live more equal. And I always say that equality is equality. So fighting for somebody else's rights doesn't in any way diminish your own rights. So me fighting for the LGBTQ plus rights doesn't in any way diminish my rights as a black woman, or me fighting against racism. In fact, we're all in that fight together. And it's like, how much easier would it be if we just fought everybody else's battles, and that gives everybody else a break, and it means that we'll get there quicker. So we'll get to that point where society is just more accepting, more open, where, you know, we just don't care who you are, you know, what you do, who you love, just as long as you're happy and as long as, you know, we are all living side by side. And so we have to get to that point. And I think, you know, generationally and over decades, you know, women have fought for women's rights, black people have fought for black people's rights, you know, gay people fought for gay rights. Well, actually, we need to mix it up a bit, and I think that's how we move forward. Everybody starts fighting for everyone else's rights.
Is there a sense that that is happening more or perhaps less in the year 2018?
I think that social media has meant that it's highlighted the struggles that people face, and then it's kind of highlighted that we need allies, so everybody needs allies. And because that's highlighted, and because the world's become so much smaller and everybody knows somebody who is, almost, it means that there'll be a majority movement where we'll say, well, actually, you know, if you see something happening on the street or on the tube, say, you know, don't do that. That person's my friend, even if you never know, you know, you've never met that person before.
Yeah, don't forget, throughout the discussion, do get in touch, share your thoughts, your comments, your questions to the panel. Do that just by commenting below. It really is as simple as that. You know, Michael, you talked really briefly about the success that you've had in doing something, in you know, making a change. What more do you think needs to be done to ensure that change happens?
Well, I mean, I find it always really tricky watching on as people put their Pride celebrations together, which is the month we're in now. We look at kind of big multinational corporations willing to stick their rainbow flags onto their goods and their products, who actually throughout the year do very little, if anything, to support our community. You have politicians who come out and, not done, do similar things. And I do struggle with it. I find it really tricky when we've got, and I'll talk about, you know, Theresa May, who I'm sure will produce a Pride address in the coming weeks, who'll come out and do that. And, you know, putting her voting history aside of supporting Section 28 and so on, but also of a government which has kind of gone through and cut funding to local government services, which have been relied upon traditionally for LGBT services. I mean, I don't think you can avoid that. So I think that's the key thing during Pride, is to ask ourselves, like, what should be happening throughout the year? And those people who come along and say, you know, we support you now, where are they the rest of the time? Where are they when it's not in it for them? It's something that happened actually with the community centre. Someone, a member of a band, a famous band, called me up and said, like, what can we do to help? And it was, you know, the first time actually I'd been interactive with someone who, in this project or anything else, who wasn't a member of our community, but wasn't there for the recognition, wasn't there for having their face or their, you know, company logo pinned to something, but just wanted to give us some support. And that's the key question I think we should ask ourselves.
What's the issue with, I'm being devil's advocate here, but people that perhaps aren't vocal in their support the rest of the year through, coming forward and saying, for Pride, I'm here, I support it, I want to get my logo and the rainbow flag on my business. What's the issue with that?
Because what does it mean? You know, it's not the idea of Pride to me, and the idea of the you know, the flag and what it stands for is far more than just a day to enjoy ourselves, which of course is an important thing to do. Like, just existing, just coming out and having a good time together and celebrating our community is worthwhile. But I mean, the answers are multiple. Firstly and foremostly, there are companies that make money, operate, complicit in oppressing LGBT people elsewhere. So, you know, some of the companies this year that have put their Pride logos on T-shirts have you know, produce goods in countries where it's illegal to be LGBT, where people are, you know, physically attacked, put in prisons, and worse.
And of course, just to say, none of those companies are here with us to respond to that.
No, of course, I won't name names either, but that's just a broad thing. But I also think it's bigger. I think that our community deserves more than to be used as a way of showing off that we're, you know, progressive. I think people want to say they support our community, and a community that is struggling. Like, we can talk about these examples later. I know the homelessness statistic is brought up. We found out this week that, you know, I think it was like LGBTQ hate crimes against LGBT people are up like 80% or something since 2013, and that's considered to be underreported. Trans people, and I'm not going to go through the statistics now, but, you know, much more likely to, you know, attempt suicide, to self-harm, struggle with mental health problems. I mean, our community is in dire need of support. And if companies want to, you know, get involved in that and want to use it, then fine. It's not my place to say no, but it can't just be piecemeal and it can't just be words. It needs to be actions too.
Yeah, okay. Tim, moving on slightly, are charities best suited to helping the community, or should this be government-led?
Well, I think it needs to be a collective action, and I would challenge Michael that there are some corporations out there that are really supportive. I mean, I can give you an example of where you have the charity sector coming together with corporates for positivity. We have the UK's first safe house for LGBT people, our Purple Door project, and that is purely funded through businesses and individuals from our community. So it's a community coming together with businesses to provide safe homes for young LGBT people who've been thrown out by their families. So we can see some positivity in there. I think it has to be from all sides, so it should be all sectors working together. It's the community, it's corporates, and it's the state. Nobody can wash their hands of responsibility for ensuring that people feel safe at home, that people feel safe on the streets. And that's my worry at the moment. I think it's always a secondary issue, and people have become complacent, and people think now that we have legislation in place we're fine, but we're not. And if Michael and I were to get on a bus tonight and hold hands and start kissing somebody, we'd be in danger. We'd be absolutely in danger. So it's the whole of society working together on a solution.
Dawn, should there be more of a focus on a top-down approach? Does government need to do more?
No, I mean, government has its responsibility, and Michael mentioned Theresa May, and she's the Prime Minister, and she has a responsibility. So the government, for instance, delaying the review of the Gender Recognition Act, what it's done in the 12 months that it delayed that review is created a void. And what happened in that void was that hate crime increased. And there was lots of misinformation that's been peddled about. And so, you know, especially if you're trans, you were more fearful of your life. You were more fearful of even, you know, where you go to the toilet. You know, I had trans people saying to me, you know, I've never been scared before, but now I'm scared. You know, I'm washing my hands and I'm scared that people are looking at my hands. And so this void that was created, and I think it was rather cruel of the government to have a 12-month void. And I think that they knew, the evidence was there, they knew that hate crime was increasing, and yet still they did nothing about it. And next week they're going to come out and you're going to hear all this boasting about, we've done the biggest ever survey of the LGBTQ plus community, and we've got all this statistics and data. So they're going to want to pat on the back for that. But actually, it's a bit like what both Michael and Tim saying, well, now what are you going to do? Now you've got this data, which the community nothing's going to come as a surprise to the community at all. So it's going to be, what are you going to do next? Because the government's role is to make a legislation that takes away barriers and stops discrimination. They can't win hearts and minds, but what they can do is make sure that they act quickly and efficiently and effectively to help the community.
It's a really interesting point, actually. Claire, who's been in touch, asks about that action plan. She asks, what's the one hope for each of you that will be addressed to support the community in that plan? Do you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to pinpoint. I think the biggest thing I struggle with is when the government come out and say how much of a supporter they are of LGBT rights whilst they deport LGBT people back to countries where it's illegal to be LGBT. I hope that that's something that comes through in this survey. I imagine it won't be, but I think when we see that happening regularly, which we've seen all too often, not just the Home Office asking for people to send proof of their sexuality, but continuously deporting people back to places where it's illegal to be gay or to be lesbian or to be trans, I hope that's something that gets picked up on.
Yeah, Tim, what's the one thing you hope is included?
I'd like to echo that, and I'm going to be cheeky and say two things, but I will echo what you say. We see young people facing who are in danger of being removed from the country, who've come here for safety. So I would like to see that. The things for me are, one thing is around monitoring. We're an invisible group. There are so many more LGBT people out there who are invisible to the statistics, or invisible to services. And if I give you an example, a young woman that we helped, she'd gone to a local housing service, and they were so concerned that as a black British woman, they didn't want to put her in an area where there was high race crime, but nobody asked her about her sexual orientation. So she's walking down the street in this new place she was housed with her girlfriend and got her legs broken because there was homophobia locally, but nobody had asked her that question. So she suffered violence as a result of that. So monitoring would be a big ask for me. And my other thing is, can we please recognise LGBT young people as a vulnerable group if they've been thrown out of home, and not see them as a group, you know, young people who can go back home. It's not safe for them, but they're not seen as vulnerable under the law.
Dawn, the one thing you'd like to see on that plan?
I think there's too many, like Michael and Tim has done, there's too many things that needs to happen, but I would like to see a focus on mental health issues when almost half of the LGBTQ plus community have contemplated taking their own lives. I think that is of epidemic proportions, and I think it's so important. And I just think, as a society, how can we just accept that as a statistic? We wouldn't accept it in anything else. So I would also like to see a focus on mental health.
Keep those comments and questions please coming in. Really appreciate it, and especially given that I understand there's a bit of a football match happening somewhere, but that's not important. Join us instead. Look, picking up on the point that you made, Tim, about visibility, Andrew's made a really important point, really interesting one. He says, will you be getting the press to show the LGBT community on Pride as more than just drag queens and guys in leather? On that issue of visibility, how much of a sense is there? You mentioned the woman who got her legs broken for being out and about with her girlfriend. How much of a sense is there that visibility issue that perhaps needs to be worked on when it comes to Pride?
Absolutely. I think we've got to be seen as a very diverse community doing lots of things, and I think the danger is that lots of different elements of our community get missed, don't get seen. You know, and I think that's what we've got this massive platform on which to challenge stereotypes, challenge people's viewpoints, and we need to make the most of that.
I was going to say, I think the thing is as well is that it's great that everyone can just be their true, authentic selves, and if people want to see different, I mean, LGBTQ plus community are everywhere. Yeah. So, you know, if people want to see different types of LGBT, then we need safer environments. If you have safer environments, then you will have footballers coming out, you know, as LGBTQ plus. You will have executives coming out as LGBTQ plus. It's not like a spectacle that you go and see. It's part of society, and the problem is that often it's not a safe space, and so we have to create a safe space. So if you know, it's kind of crazy.
Well, you look at San Francisco as an example, and you know, San Francisco has wonderful community centres, has a range of projects, and they're within the city, all over the city. All right, you've got the Castro, but everything is spread out, and people are visible, and people feel safe. And once you feel safe somewhere, you will come out, and you will be public. It's no surprise that people in very rural areas who are LGBTQ aren't visible in those areas, and the phrase, you know, the only gay in the village, because nobody wants to come out in an area they feel unsafe.
That issue of diversity is an interesting one, and actually an interesting one particularly when it comes to specialist community centres, venues like yours. How much of a sense is there that specialist LGBT venues can cater to the needs of such a diverse audience?
I mean, I think it's doable and feasible. I think what we see in London in particular is not that at the moment. 48%, I think, of LGBTQ+ venues have shut in the last, I can't remember the number of years.
58%, yeah.
58%, sorry. So like we just haven't got the space for there to be a wide variety of options. But at the same time, when we do have them, they understandably tend to cater to people who are going to go out to bars drinking late at night. So you look in East London where I'm based, and it's mostly bars that cater to young white men. You go to Soho, I think it's maybe slightly older, but also mostly white men. And I think that we do deserve to have spaces which firstly don't require us to have money to be there, because that's a whole portion of our community that's left out. Like, it's not cheap to go to a bar on a night out, to pay your entry to a club, or just to be there in general. I don't think it's right that people who are under 18 don't have access to community spaces and spaces that we can operate and run. As sadly, most of them aren't wheelchair accessible, so you have a whole other group of our community who aren't there. And then there's people who don't drink, so they're that people from the Muslim community, and obviously some are happy to go and party, but some people don't want to. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Age comes into it too. So I do think that there's a need, and I always think it's really interesting to contemplate the idea that for any other marginalised group in society, even if we take away all those things, that the place you'd be told to go to find out about your history, to share stories from your past, to learn from each other, to, like, you know, deal with your problems would be a bar or a club. Like, it's a bit mad, and there's a reason why we struggle in our community with alcohol addiction and drug addiction. It's a whole host of reasons. But part of that is because the community spaces we've got are driven by that. And don't get me wrong, I love the pub, I love a bar, I like a drink. I'm not saying that shouldn't be an option, but I think it's vital we have alternatives.
Picking up on that, Tim, how much are you seeing the sorts of needs of the young people coming to your charity for support, for help, changing? Is it changing?
It is. I mean, my big worry is we're 30 next year, and it's a downright shame that we're still here doing the same work and seeing more young people. And what I'm seeing is, if I give you some examples, I'm seeing more complex need. Mental health, 75% of the young people who come through our door are facing post-traumatic stress disorder, all sorts of issues about the experience of coming out. Substance misuse is a big issue. We're seeing young people who are having to search for companionship online and going on apps and finding themselves in all sorts of situations and developing substance misuse issues. We've got the issue for young people seeking asylum who aren't being heard. That it's very complex being a young LGBTQ person in society, and you're faced with so many challenges and nowhere to go. And to Michael's point, you've got to give a variety of safe spaces, and an alcohol-free space that offers a chance to meet people who are diverse and open you up to that experience are wonderful. It's just as important today as it was 30 years ago when I was coming out.
We're going to continue the discussion in just a moment's time, but today marks the 49th anniversary of the Stonewall riots, and we've been speaking to some of the people responsible for bringing pride to the world.
Gays the Word is a quite unique institution. The Lesbian Discussion Group, for example, has been meeting almost every week for 36 years. It's one of the most long-standing community groups in London. So that gives an example of kind of how invested in the community this bookshop is. And it's a place that all sectors of the gay and lesbian community come to. There's a scene in the film Pride where LGSM are meeting and someone throws a brick through the window. You know, these things happen, sadly, to visible gay businesses. Thankfully, in terms of Gays the Word, very, 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 very rarely. My third one that happened relatively recently, called The Glaziers, got on with it. I'm not going to let some idiot who's got some sort of prejudice in their heart affect me or kind of the well-being of the bookshop. The door was open, the glass was swept away, and we carried on trading and didn't stop for a second. You know, like that sense of resilience is something that I've learned from my colleagues here and from my lesbian and gay elders.
In 2015, with Pride in London support and support from Manchester Pride and Pride in Hull, we set up the national network for UK Prides. When at that point there were 72 Prides, there's now 142, so it's almost doubled in 3 years, partly as a result of having a national network there to support them. And then I went to Baltic Pride in Vilnius 2 years ago when I was asked if I joined the board of the European Pride Network. So I've been there for 2 years helping to do that. So this weekend we were at Thessaloniki Pride in Greece, and in 2 years' time they host Europride. And I know from lots of friends that I've spoken to who've said, "Oh, Greece, Pride, that must be amazing." Well, actually last year that was my first ever experience of tear gas at that Pride, as police were trying to contain protesters who were trying to stop the Pride. This year we thought it had gone off without incident, and actually 2 people who got separated from the parade got pushed into the sea, being told by the people who pushed them in, "We kill people like you." Now, the police have made 4 arrests, they're dealing with it seriously, but it just shows that even in Thessaloniki, even in Greece, even in countries that we think, oh, it must be okay, actually there is still a challenge.
We have progressed only as far as the country that is worst in LGBT rights have progressed. So we're all in this together, and I think it's extremely important to remember in bigger, more successful prides that there are countries and cities where it's not possible to have a pride, and for LGBTI people where it's not possible to be out. And that's one of the messages that Europride, any pride, brings, is a visibility of the community for those people who are not able to have it in their own countries. Now, coming up to 50th anniversary of Stonewall riots, I think it's a right time to remember that it still is a riot in many places in the world. And as long as we remember that, the Pride movement will succeed.
Now here's a stat for you. 24% of young homeless people identify as LGBT. Picking up on that, Tim, you made some really important points, some really interesting points in that line. But what do you think is behind that disproportionately high percentage?
Well, we come back to the thing around societal acceptance, or the lack of acceptance within society. If I look at the young people we see, 77% are rejected by their families. Now that's very different than the general homeless population of young people. And when they are homeless, they're more likely to suffer abuse, to have less access to services, have mental health issues as a result of their treatment. Basically, services aren't geared up to help them, so that the problem just continues and continues.
Dawn, are current provisions failing to reach those rather most in need?
Yeah, I think it's failing, and it's also failing in its understanding of the need. And so that creates a problem and an issue. And the thing is that it costs more money later on. So it would make sense if we tackled the problem head on, invested rather than cutting money and investment into communities and community services. And that way everything will just work a lot smoother. And so I think that, you know, the government's austerity program has affected people in a really stark way. And then when people were struggling, they then literally become meaner, and they, you know, in more ways than one. And so it just adds to the problem.
Okay, money's at the heart of this then?
Well, I think that money is part of it, because if you don't invest and services close down, we've seen a lot of services in the LGBTQ plus community close. A lot of safe places have closed. So people haven't got safe places to go to. Where do they go? Where do they seek help? Who do they talk to? And it's a real problem.
We're joining you this evening on the same day that we've heard the news that here in London, the Mayor has committed to funding a new LGBT homeless service. Michael, not the one that you're involved with, but nonetheless something you welcome?
Yeah, incredible. So important. I think I find it quite frustrating that we're reliant on volunteers to set these projects up. I mean, I understand that that's how the community's operated, and I think it will be in perpetuity, but you know, this is the sort of service and support that should have been provided long ago. I think it's incredibly important there are tailored services, touched upon earlier as to why. But I guess to bring it back to the question as to like, why is it important that, why is there this problem, this disproportionality? I think it's sort of repetitive, but I kind of think it's an important thing to hammer home. Unlike any other marginalised group, being LGBT doesn't run in the family. Like, people forget this, I think, sometimes. If you grow up as someone who's Jewish or Muslim, if you're black, if you're Asian, if you're a woman, generally there's someone around who you can look to for advice and guidance and support, who shares that identity, who's been through something similar. And when you're LGBT, that's not the case. In fact, it's quite likely you've never come across someone openly LGBT in your family. And so I think we sometimes forget that there's a need for people outside of our community to step in, to step up. I was talking to someone the other day who was involved in the Gay Liberation Front, so actively involved a long time ago. Well, not that long ago, I should say. He'd kicked me for saying that. And so he gave this really beautiful speech about how it shouldn't come down to this. But actually, for every LGBT person, there's usually one or two parents, there's one or two siblings, there's grandparents, there's cousins, and it is our responsibility, all of us, to look out for those people. And I think that our community often fails to do that. I think we've got to the point now where for many people in our community, certainly white, middle-class gay men, it's much easier to slot into everyday life, to make it, to be successful, to be comfortable. You can forget the problems that are faced by so many. And there's sort of an unwillingness, I suppose, to bring people up with them, whether that be in funding services, and I think that some people do incredible work in supporting the community, but many don't. But also in realising that when you get that position of privilege, it's your responsibility to use that for good. Like it wasn't just those people who were at the front of the Stonewall riots. I mean, the examples are always questioned, but it was people who were trans, it was people of colour, it was women who led those fights too. And not that that should matter, but it's important to remember that as we move forward.
Really interesting. On that point, Linda Riley's been in touch, the publisher of Diva magazine. Thanks for watching. Who says,
my Diva Award.
Linda asks, what can we do to help bring the LGBTQ community more together? She says there's becoming a massive divide between, in particular, the L and the T part of the community. How can we find a resolution? Simply together we are better, but right now we're not working together to influence change. Tim?
I think it's about recognising our intersectionality, and we don't do enough of that. And well, if you think we're founded on working together, that's how we were founded. Trans people helped gay people get rights, women helped gay people get rights. So I think the thing is we've got to ensure that inclusivity. So LGBTQ, for example, let's use phrases like that. Let's not forget people of intersex within that. And when we're developing and designing things, let's look at the whole picture, let's look at the whole scope, whether you're in the voluntary sector, public sector or private sector. Include people from all those groups to work together on a solution. Don't focus on one group. I think there is the issue around, as a white gay middle-class male, I've got privilege and I recognise that. So how do I work in partnership with people who've got less privilege within my own community? So we've got to work together.
Really interesting point. Look, I don't want to run out of time, so let's try and get to the last question and also pick up some of your comments and thoughts. Do keep them coming in. The last point to pick up this evening, how are perceptions changing both inside and outside the community? And Dawn, I want to start with you. In Parliament, how are perceptions changing?
I suppose everything changes very slowly in Parliament. Nothing changes very quickly, to be fair. But I think we had a good debate the other day, and it was acknowledged that Parliament needs to do better and needs to move quickly. As I said, that gap and that void. I mean, I was talking to Michael Cashman today, and we were talking about 30 years ago since Section 28. All of that hate that was generated against the gay community is now being generated to the trans community, and that's really important why the community needs to stick together and work together, because otherwise it's going to take another 30 years of trying to unravel all this hate rather than us tackling it right now.
Michael, you touched on this a little bit earlier, that issue of tokenistic support for the LGBT community. Is that something that we should be taking more seriously? Do we need to actually step back and say the support you're offering for festivals like Pride is not enough, there needs to be more?
Sure, and I think that both goes for businesses, and I don't doubt there are some corporations and companies that do incredible work, but I think across the board there's more to be done. But I also think it goes for government too. I mean, I get incredibly frustrated when we see messages from ministers, from politicians who will pay lip service to our community but do very little. There are serious things that need to happen very shortly to make our community's lives better. One of them is fully funding and supporting services that are vital, but there's also other law changes. There's changes to the Gender Recognition Act, there's the introduction of PrEP and making that accessible to everyone, there's same-sex health and education lessons in schools, things that are so simple to do that we think should be normalised, but still there's a struggle against the government to make that happen.
I'd say the Labour Party has all of that in its manifesto.
I'm fully aware, Dawn. And I think that's, I suppose that's what I find most frustrating, is that I understand that in the past, as someone who's 25, I understand that maybe times were different 20, 30, 40 years ago. Maybe it's okay to forgive, and I'm not sure it's true. Those politicians who are responsible in the past for oppressing our community, if they really have enlightened themselves, and that's what Theresa May continuously says, but fundamentally, I struggle, because I struggle that we have a Prime Minister who'll say that she's moved on and say that she's learnt lessons and say she's no longer in that position, but actually won't do things to support our community now. And that's it, it's actions that speak louder than words.
And can I say, it is you do have to be so mindful. It isn't something that, and you're absolutely right, like just making a statement isn't enough. You actually have to be mindful with everything you do. So every time I do something or organise something, it's like, have we got an LGBTQ plus representative, you know, on the panel? You know, it's something that if you're not mindful, if you're not sort of committed to doing it, then it really doesn't happen. And it, you know, it's not an easy thing, but you have to be really committed to doing it to make it happen. So I agree.
I don't think we saw that, sorry to interject, but just with kind of the way that other political parties have engaged with having trans people, or trans women on all women's shortlists, not that they, and making sure people are actively inclusive of trans people. The hysteria that was surrounding that in the media, which is continuing to go on, is not only outrageous, but other political parties didn't come out and say, actually, no, we all agree on this. And things like that, small things that other people can be doing to show their support.
It's really interesting you pick up on that. What role is the media playing, Tim?
Well, good and bad. It's a very big mix. But it is about visibility, and it's about giving access, and it doesn't always have to be celebrities that do that, you know, regular people. And I think what the media needs to do is to give people that platform to share their stories, and not to focus on, you know, the thing about focusing on, well, here's a shock story, here's, you know, Elton John having children, you know, let's focus on regular people and regular families and people developing same-sex families and relationships and everything. And I think it is the moment. Headlines. We saw the headline when Jake Graff married his partner Hannah on The Sun. It was so negative, and that just sits with how many readers? 1.5 million readers or whatever they've got. Just little things like that. They've got to be so careful. Just with a headline, you can shake people.
But there's also this, is that 30 years ago it might have been acceptable to have debates on the BBC, for instance, about gay people. We had that sort of, I guess it was normalised before my time that, you know, are gays a menace to society? Are they a problem? Should we ban them? Should we stop talking about them? And thankfully we've sort of moved on from that on the most part in this country. And I think that broadcasters and the media have a responsibility to say that actually with trans people and their safety, their security, it's not a debate. It's not a discussion, it's not balanced. And I sit and listen to, certainly the BBC who say they have to be balanced. And I can go on these shows, and I won't do them about this issue, but you hear them like say, well, we've got someone who's transgender and someone who's not, and now they're going to fight out whether they deserve to exist in this country. And I think that there needs to be a concerted effort by politicians, by people in the media, from organisations to say, actually, that's not a discussion. It's not about whether or not it's a good idea to cut down this tree or whether or not it's a good idea to change the law in tax. It's someone's fundamental right to exist. A group of people who are continuously oppressed, marginalised and face violence in our society. And I think I've had enough of it personally. Is
it not really important to shed light, however, on the sorts of discussions that I'm sure are happening in households across the country? As uncomfortable as they might make us feel, is it not important to have those conversations, to air them? Conversations are important. Like, I'm also Jewish, right? So when we've had lots of discussions around anti-Semitism in the last few years, it's been incredibly important. But not once has any broadcaster gone, let's get a Nazi on and let's get someone who's Jewish on and make them have a fight. You can have nuanced conversations about experiences. You know, there are so many trans people who actively, shouldn't have to, but actively are willing to talk to people, to engage both in the media, through organisations, through their experiences, to talk to people, because of course trans people are a minority in our society, and so, you know, communicating, conversing, educating people is important. And whilst it's not their responsibility to, there are many people who are willing, but there's a difference between that and asking them to defend themselves, to excuse themselves, to create space for themselves, and to, you know, say why they shouldn't be targeted by bigots and people with prejudice. And I do think that has to change. Ending on very wise words.
I agree.
Afraid to say we are almost out of time. Thank you so much to all three of you. It's been fascinating, really interesting to hear your insights. So thank you very much. And also, happy almost Pride, because we are just a week away. Thank you for watching. It's really been a pleasure. And of course, you can see us all at Pride. I'm assuming we'll all be there on Saturday, the 7th of July. And if you'd like to find out anything more, do visit us online, prideinlondon.org, or you can download the app. Thanks for watching.